You're listening to All In. This is the podcast dedicated to helping you fulfill the mission of God in your life and around the world. I'm your host, Jeff Roper. Hey everybody, welcome to this week's episode of All In. So glad to have you joining me today. Today I thought about titling this episode, Help! My Wife is a Strong Leader Too. And I want to explore with you, what does it look like to be the kind of man that is a champion for your wife who is a strong woman, a strong leader, and how do you do that, and all the things that are entailed with that. And I could think of nobody better to talk to about this than the one and only Gary Dunahoo. Gary is the senior pastor at Lighthouse Church in beautiful Newberry Park, California. And in addition to being a very fruitful, successful pastor of a local church, he is also married to Tammy Dunahoo, who is the general supervisor for the US Foursquare Church. And so in some ways, I don't quite know, Gary, how this works, but you're kind of married to your boss.
That's true. I'm married to my boss's boss.
Yes, true. This is true. And it's been a fascinating thing to watch you guys. And so I wanted to get you on the phone and talk to you about this because I've seen it as a genuine, authentic thing that honestly, I felt like whether anybody else that listens to this podcast gets anything out of it, I wanted to talk to you about it because I see something in you that I want more of in myself in this regard. My wife is a gifted, amazing woman of God, and I want to know how to be a better champion of her, and I think we might have a few listeners that could benefit from our discussion about it. So, Gary, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you. It's good to be with you, Jeff.
Hey, my first real encounter with your guys' dynamics wasn't in some of the formal meetings that we've been in together when I've been in and out of Los Angeles, but it actually happened, well, I knew it was the real thing, was at a U.S. convention a few years ago. I forget which city we were in. And you'll remember it's not too many years ago that we used to have some pretty hot and heavy business sessions because of some of the things happening in the U.S. National Church. And you walked up,
right.
Tammy was moderating as the general supervisor, and you walked up to the microphone as a local church pastor. And you had to ask some very challenging questions as a local pastor to the general supervisor, who happened to be your wife. And I laughed and says, you go, Tammy, honey, I love you. I know I have to go home with you, but I have to ask this question.
That's right.
Do you
I remember that?
Yes, I bet you do. I bet you do. And to watch your interaction with Tammy and her interaction with you in that pressure cooker with, I would guess, I don't know what the attendance at that particular session was, but there were hundreds of people there. And to watch how you guys authentically interacted with respect and honor, I knew then this is real, and I just wanted to learn from you. So can you tell me a little bit, or as much as you can, about the background of that, and how did this all come about?
Certainly. Again, I love the topic because years ago, I really do feel like in some ways God forewarned me that this was going to happen, and didn't have a clue as to what level of what it would look like, the differing roles that we would carry. But Tammy was a want-to-be stay-at-home mom when we had two children, and she wanted to stay at home. She wanted to be mom. And 2 weeks after our youngest was on her own, 2 weeks after that, Tammy received an invitation by Foursquare to do some leadership development. And that came as a result of both of us partnering. And so we were always doing things together. And I felt like this was a real key thing for us. And of course, you could redirect me or ask any questions. But the way Tammy and I have always worked together, we've not seen it hierarchical. We've not seen it... we've really seen it more the gifts of the Spirit and how God has made us, how He's designed us. Because when we were co-pastoring, when we're doing things together, she never would call it co-pastoring. But when we were working together in church, we would look at what needed to be done, and whatever needed to be done, we would ask which of us is best suited for that and who has the most time. So we would really steward our life by asking who can do a better job at what needs to be done, because it's not about us, it's about what needs to be done. Which that's the way we read 1 Corinthians 12. The gifts aren't for us as a title, the gifts are more through us for the common good. So the way we practice that, we would just ask, do you have time to do this? She would say, babe, you're better at this than I am. Do you have time to do that? How can I support you in something else so that you could fulfill that responsibility? And as we begin to live that way, and I called it co-pastoring, but as we live that way, Tammy's leadership just became obvious. I mean, she's just incredibly gifted, a very smart lady, but it's not just intelligence. She's very, very gifted. And so that started to be seen by others, because we would do some things for the district at that time. Dennis Easter was our supervisor back in the South Central District at that time. That's what it was called. Now it's the Mid-South. And so they asked her to do some things. 2 weeks after our daughter was on her own and doing well, they asked her to do some things, and that just kind of led on. But early on, Jeff, I really heard the Lord say to me, I'm going to carry her back someday. And I came home and I told her that. I told her, I said, babe, the Lord spoke to me this weekend that one of these days I'm going to carry your bags. And she didn't have confidence. She didn't have ambition. But yet years later, that turned out to be extremely true, that I ended up carrying her bag. So we've been able to have a marriage, a deep friendship, a great relationship, and a marriage. But we see who's best suited for doing what. I don't think the Foursquare Church would want me to be the general supervisor. I'm a lot better local church pastor.
Mm-hmm.
And Tammy, her gifts, she's just really gifted at what she's doing, and God uses her that way powerfully.
Yeah, that He does. And how have you always been like this? With you and Tammy have been married how long?
We'll be married 37 years this August.
Okay, so how old were you when you started pastoring a local church?
You know, I was when we got married, I was working for Getty Oil Company in California. And we had a marriage for a little over a year before I was asked to become an associate pastor. But even with being the associate pastor before children, we just did a lot of things together.
Okay.
And we just did ministry together. It was very natural. It wasn't strategic or planned. It was just, we would just do things together, and we just kind of had this rhythm. And I guess some may want a deeper answer than that, but that's just the reality. Whatever we did it together. We enjoyed life together, and we helped each other. And early on, I was given the responsibilities of associate pastor in a local church. And so as we're just continuing to do things again, it just emerged at how effective that she was. The truth is, I thought I was better than I was, because when we started doing things separate in ministry, and she had her responsibility and I had mine, she started doing district stuff, and I was still in local church. I found out I wasn't as good as I thought I was. She was really my backup. And I said it some tongue in cheek, but it really did. I didn't realize just how well she came alongside and made what I was doing easier and better. Because Tammy's capability, she can speak, she can administrate, she can plan. She can lead. So if I was vacant, she could step in, and it didn't go down at all. It was just really, really effective.
Yeah, she is one exceptional leader. I've really come to both love and respect her tremendously, both as a person and as a leader. Now, when this was happening, when this development of you guys' partnership in ministry was happening, were there times, well, like you were just talking about, where you found out you weren't quite as good as you may have thought you were? Did that stir up any points of personal insecurity, or like, oh, geez, I need to do some, I better man up here. I better do, the hitting on those male insecurities that can happen so often and so easily with us, or was it just a piece of cake for you?
No, absolutely insecure, completely insecure on that stuff. That when it really started getting exposed, that a lot of what people would give me credit for being effective in, it's really what the Bible teaches to me about equipping. Is there may be a point person, but you have people around you that really make things rock and really make things go really well. Well, Tammy was that key person that was doing that. And when we started having a separation of duties outside the local church, that's where I started saying, oh, wow, she's really been that support system, and she was doing a lot more than what I knew. And it did hit an insecurity for me because the conflict for me, Jeff, was, of course, I love Tammy, and I want to see her do really well. But the question came up, do I really want to see her do well and me not do as well without her, And so there was definitely that tension. But that's when God just always had me looking at my personal life and walking that way. And I never want to use people for the ministry. I want to build people up in the ministry. I really think that people need to be developed. And so the responsibility that they're carrying, it needs to add value to them, as well as their contribution needs to add value to the organization. And so when I saw Tammy adding value to the organization, but just staying and helping me wasn't adding value to her or her leadership, it was one of the signals that God had something different for her than just local church ministry. And that was kind of sad because we'd always done everything together. Mm-hmm. So we definitely had to process that. We talked with friends. We prayed it through. But I will say I really believe our friendship and the relationship that we had built, because that was probably about 25 years into our marriage when this started surfacing. Tammy's leadership was at a different level of responsibility than mine. Mm-hmm. That's when it started coming up, and we began to process that. But there was tension, but we talked it through. Two kids that love each other, and we talked it through, and I'm very much an advocate and a sponsor of other people. It's not just Tammy, it's other people. I like to empower other people. But you know what? One day it came home that it was empowering the person that was my greatest asset. And so now you're going to go, as a leader, you're going to go, do we really give our best away? Do we really sponsor our best? Do we really do that? And after wrestling with God for a while, by the way, he always wins.
Yeah.
After wrestling with God for a while, I'm really grateful for those times because I've grown as a person. I've grown as a leader, very much so, after seeing Tammy take another area of responsibility.
Now, normally when you see couples in ministry, they generally fall into probably one of three broad categories. You have the spouse who is completely in the background, never wants to be up front or anything else, and they're completely happy being in the shadows or hidden, or no upfront ministry whatsoever. Then you see those that sound like what you and Tammy were like, and like what my wife Debbie and I are like, where we're doing things side by side. We're right there together, partnering. But then you've now entered into a third category where you've got a very distinct ministry assignment as a local pastor of a vibrant, healthy church, and Tammy has an assignment for this season of her life as a general supervisor. What skills did you have to learn, or personality traits or mindset did you have to develop when you made that transition, so that, maybe somebody listening has a spouse that is going off on a different trajectory, not out of a bad thing because they can't work together, but out of a good thing because God is taking them to another level or to another assignment, that is so that they're in it together, but they're not doing the same things together.
Well, that's a great question. Let me just say really quickly, the first category you gave is, my father was a pastor, so I was raised in a pastor's home, and my mother was that first category that you mentioned. My mother was that she never wanted to be up front. We had to, anybody had to twist her arm to say anything from the pulpit. She never wanted to do that. But she was that key put everything together and recruit people. She could organize, recruit people, and get a whole team, and they would have a blast doing whatever they were doing. That was my mother. So I got to see that example, and it was a healthy relationship between my parents. And she never, ever felt a responsibility to teach or to lead from the pulpit or from up front. It was always behind the scenes. But if it wasn't for what she did, there would be a whole lot left undone. So that gift is incredibly important. And Tammy and I, when we began to see that her gift was different, we went through a process of something that Dennis Easter brought to our district, and it was called Focused Living. I think they changed the name now to Focusing Leaders. And it's a 2-day process to help people just really see the path that God has you on. And if you really want to know how to go forward, you need to reflect about the past to see the movement of God in all the events of your life and to see the influences that God brought into your life. And when we came through that, Tammy really was able to see her calling. And through that conversation, it was almost a 4-day conversation and process. When she was able to articulate it, and of course, I might get a little careful because it was really emotional and in a positive way. I saw it too, and I saw God's hand on her. And so we pulled out a sheet of paper, and we drew a line right down the middle. And on the left side, top left side, we put the word called. And on the top right side, we put the word capable. And we just begin to evaluate, Tammy, out of everything you're doing right now in our church, in our ministry, what are the things that you're capable of doing? List all those things. And then what are the things that you're fulfilling in ministry that you feel called to? Well, the left side under called had 3 contributions. And the side on the right where it said capable, I'm capable of doing these things, she filled out the whole front and half of the back. It literally took us 3 years to process getting Tammy out of the things that she was capable of doing and start transitioning her into the things that she felt she was called to do. Because we couldn't, what we saw was just how many things that she was putting together, that she was leading, that she was influencing in our church. And she couldn't just jump out of that because it would hurt the church, and neither of us wanted to do that. So we just began to say, okay, what's the priority? What's the things that we can move on right now? Who can you develop and train? And so it became a real clinic, if you would, for Tammy and I to develop other people into areas and roles. But the reason and the motive of doing it was to get her aligned with what God had really called her to. So the significance of focused living or focusing leaders was understanding her personal calling. And once that was seen, we began to move out of that. So when that happened, part of it was, what do I need around me? What gifts do I need around me that she was fulfilling because she was my wife? And so that was part of the process as well.
That's really good. Now, if you were to sit down with a pastor that was in your case, let's take you and Tammy and go back 15 years, say 15, 20 years, wherever you would pick as the pivotal point, where where you're on the beginning point, where you know you're on the curve, the turn to start down this trajectory of really being the champion and as you said, the one who empowers and releases, most of all, the person nearest and dearest to your own heart and life, being your wife. Let's say you've got a young pastor and he's 30 years old and you're going to pour everything you can into him. What are the key things you would start coaching or mentoring that young couple in?
Well, this could sound like the church answer to say, but I mean it very, very sincerely. And that is have what I call a Sabbath rhythm. And make sure that you're not just working for God, but make sure that you have daily times that you really just listen to God and listen to God's heart. Because that will help you trust Him through the process. Because I know for ourselves, I didn't realize just how naturally dependent I had become upon Tammy's leadership ability. I saw her as my wife, and I saw us doing ministry together. I didn't see necessary, the capital L leader that God was developing in this person. And I think the thing that saved us is that we were really serious about our devotions. And we were serious, like personally, just individually, your walk with God. Because what we begin to sense spiritually that God was doing this in Tammy, and what I would encourage somebody that's 30 years old and at the beginning process of this, is it's going to challenge you as a person. You're not going to come out of this unscathed. You're going to grow probably as much as anybody in this process. It's not just your spouse that's going to end up getting some responsibility that would be exciting. Your responsibility is going to change. And you're going to have to know yourself deeper and better, and you're going to have to communicate what you need as a leader around you. And so if you're trusting God and you really believe God is leading this and God is really doing this in the person that you love and you're committed to, it'll help your own personal transformation because it's definitely going to affect you. And I mean that. It's challenge, but it's the right challenge. Mm-hmm. It's the godly challenge to grow us up, really.
Yeah, that's really good. I had a friend years ago. He was a counselor, and he would write these great articles in a newsletter that he would also produce. And he titled this one article, "Marriage: God's House of Ambush," and and the premise of the article was that marriage is a covenant that is so deep it touches the deep recesses of your essence as a human being in ways that no other relationship does. And it is God's way to ambush you, to get you to in your growth, in your becoming of a better follower of Jesus and dealing with your stuff. I'm sure this has no bearing to you or any of our listeners, but I can tell you my relationship with my wife has caused me to really have to assess my own insecurities and weaknesses and ambitions and everything else. And I tell you, I found God ambushing me when my old flesh wants to crawl up and be ugly about it. And I can imagine, like in a ministry time or ministry setting where you feel that pressure you got to be God's man of faith and power, and you're seeing someone else doing, how God just addresses all of those issues deep in your heart, and to be able to lay those before the Lord and say, Lord, speak to this, heal this, redeem this in me. It must have been a very powerful season for you to go through that.
Absolutely. The struggle that I had was really in Tammy's ability. Just recently, actually, just a few months ago, whether it's accurate or not, I really felt like I came to the conclusion that how God uses Tammy is in wisdom. And I see this. Tammy will, like, we would face something in the church, or I'll watch her. She was a district supervisor, now is a general supervisor. And there'll be a problem, there'll be a challenge. And she'll get that news in the afternoon. And more times than not, I mean, I wouldn't say every single time, but almost every time, somewhere in the middle of the night, I'll wake up to what I call glow face. And it scares me half to death because I'll wake up and she'll have her iPad out or something. And when you're sleeping restfully and then you wake up and then this, the glow of the iPad is shining up on someone's face in the middle of the night, that's kind of scary. But what's going on is that girl, she's hearing something from God, and she'll be able to put things together. Tammy can walk into almost any situation and bring order to it. And it's not just order, it's the right order. And it sets things up for things to go forward. It's not just to make it okay, it's really to make it excel. And that's what I need around me, because I've been more of a visionary leader, and I would bring the chaos, and there's got to be some Holy Spirit that's got to come alongside and bring order out of my chaos. And the struggle that I had was, she's so gifted at that, and it was so natural that was my wife, that was also my ministry partner, that could do what I needed done with the gifts that God could give me, because I can go get 90 people by 2 o'clock this afternoon and get them excited about where we're going. But what I need is someone to really lay out the process of, okay, well then here's how we're going to get there.
Mm-hmm.
And so I'll get them excited and get them gathered. I can recruit them and get them going, but again, I need that. The struggle I had, Jeff, was, well, God, she is exactly what I need. Why can't she do it for me? You know, why do you have to have her take that somewhere else? Why does she need to do that in other realms? And so that was the whining session that I had with God. She was so perfectly suited, and she's my wife. That was just a good combination. But with time and just seeing how effective she was and how God was using her, it became obvious that God was doing that in her, but I didn't like what he was doing in me. It wasn't quite as appealing. But now I would say, those years later, I would just say, God is smart. God is smart. He knows what he's doing to develop me as a person, and know what he's doing in the person I'm committed to in love as well.
Yeah, that's so good. It's so deep and rich. When you guys are living out your respective ministries, what is it like, between the local church, Tammy's involvement because she's got so many demands on the national side, she has to travel so much, and how do you guys work that out in the local context of the church that you're pastoring?
Well, when I was assigned to Lighthouse Church, Newbury Park, wonderful congregation of people. When I was assigned there, part of the interview process of talking with the council, and I say that because it's a medium-sized church in Foursquare, US, and when you have a church of 600-800 people, it typically involves some local leaders as they're processing the appointments, because we are an appointment system, but they still process it with them. But when we went through a bit of an interview, as we were doing that, we told the council, said, you're not, you're getting a pastor who's married, and the pastor has a wife, but you don't get a pastor's wife. And we unpacked that because in the U.S., a lot of times there's this unspoken expectation that the spouse of the pastor has a role and something to carry in the church, and that they're going to be there early, they're going to be there late, they're going to pick up things, they're going to help, they're going to lead the women's ministry, and there's this there's this unspoken expectation for those things to go on. And so we wanted to communicate, Tammy has her own responsibilities, and you're getting Gary, you're not getting Gary and Tammy. What that looks like is she's probably at Lighthouse Church maybe once every 6 weeks or so, sometimes twice in that time period. Most of the time she's traveling or doing something or carrying a responsibility in this Southern California area. And so what I like to do is, there's this hidden talent that Tammy has that most people are not aware of, because that's not her responsibility right now. And that girl can teach. Tammy is a gifted teacher. She can just put things together so quickly and speak it incredibly well. But her role as general supervisor, there's not much speaking with that. It's mostly administrating and business and leading, the district teams and all of that. But what I'll have her do, we'll look at the calendar, and it's honestly refreshing for her to be able to teach the Bible. She loves God's Word. And so when she's in town, and she's going to be in town, I always ask her, hey, would this be a great Sunday for you? How's your rest? How are you? Would this be refreshing? And so she'll teach maybe once every 2 months or so in the church. And, of course, it's always a treat when she does, because people have bought into it. We have a circle of people that pray for her, and so when she's able to be at the church and be able to teach, it's just a great thing. I help her. I don't help her at all in her role, because the general supervisor, that's a whole different ball game. So for us, Jeff, it's been a real interesting. How are we married together? How do we walk this out where we have very distinct differences of responsibility? And honestly, it's no different than one person working for one company and another person working for another company. You still have a marriage, you still have a life. But in church, it's not always seen that way. Many times we blur the lines in the marriage. And honestly, Tammy and I, you may have to correct what I say or cut this out, But we really, really encourage people, young people that are looking to get married, don't marry a ministry partner for ministry's sake.
Yeah.
Marry the person and get in a covenant relationship with that person and love them. Make them the king, make them the queen for the rest of their days. And however God uses them, support them in that. We just find that a lot of times people will look, and I know a lot of men, they'll say, I need this in a ministry partner, and they look for that in their marriage. And it blurs the lines, and many times we've married somebody, and we're using them for our ministry's sake. And honestly, I don't think God would have us do that.
That's
That's not
good
adding value
advice.
to them. That's taking value from them.
That is very good advice. You guys listening, take heed. And this is wisdom speaking to you here, and so appreciate it, Gary. I ask this of every guest on the podcast. If I had a time machine and we could take you back to your 25-year-old self, what advice would you give yourself?
Yeah, that's a good question. Well, I'll go back to what I mentioned earlier. Don't become a professional minister. Be very, very real and honest in your walk with God. And stay extremely close to God. Make time every single day to walk with God. And don't just be a talker to Him. Be a listener. Because when you listen to God and you really hear His heart, He really sets you up to be effective and successful in everything you do, as well as an advocate and a sponsor of others. So I guess I say that, Jeff, because I got to where I could do ministry, and I got to where I felt like I was good at ministry. And, just honestly, I just got away from just that personal, close, vibrant walk with Jesus. And I would just really press myself to make sure that you keep this consistent in your life. When this transition began with Tammy, of her taking responsibility different than me, I was able to take, I thought, a 6-week sabbatical, but it turned into a 4-month sabbatical. And over that time, I didn't realize how tired I was from ministry. I had no clue until I began to rest. Week 5, I realized just how tired I was. And God provided to where I could take some more time. And all I would do was just hang out in the Bible and just walk with God and exercise. And I fell in love with Jesus all over again. And that was about 15 years ago. And I wouldn't replace that. That is a treasure. So that's what I would say to my 25-year-old self.
That's really good advice. I appreciate you sharing that so openly with us. If people wanted to connect with you, find out more about you or the church, what's the best way? Would it be to go to the church's website, or what would you recommend?
Yeah, lighthousechurch.org.
Okay.
That's the best way you can find out about that. And you can write Gary, Gary, at lighthousechurch.org. That's my email. And we actually answer emails around here. So
wonderful.
We would be happy to speak with anybody or talk with anybody, encourage them. Anything that we could do, we'd be happy to do that.
Well, I appreciate you making yourself so available because I really do believe this is something that I'm just going to speak on behalf of the men. I know my wife has been amazing. We're about to celebrate our 29th anniversary, and man, my kudos to her. The longer I'm married to her, the more I love her and respect her and appreciate her. I was thinking about it today. She's in Germany right now. I'm here at our place in Athens, and she's over there doing some ministry and working with the refugees and one of our missionaries. And that poor woman has put up with a lot from me and suffered a lot, and endured a lot of my stupidity and my ambition and my young ambitions that I had when I was a younger man. And she was faithful. She put up with it. She suffered through poverty and everything else with me. And man, my kudos to her. And I want this latter half, the next 29 years of life, me being more of a champion for her. So you've been a good help and a good role model for me to look at and to emulate, and ask myself in a moment, what would Gary do?
why I keep asking Jesus, what would you do? So,
yeah, exactly. You keep doing that, and I'll watch what you do, and I'll follow that.
Sounds
And
good. Well, follow me as I follow Christ. I think we've heard that, right?
exactly. So, Gary, thank you so much for being on the podcast today. Folks, reach out to Gary if this is something that resonates in your own heart, and let it help you grow to be more like Jesus as we all seek together to fulfill the mission of God in our life and around the world. If this podcast has been helpful to you, be sure to share it with your friends, your family. Send them an email, send them a link on Facebook, whatever you use, and say, hey, check this out. You'll enjoy it. And also, you can subscribe to this podcast in iTunes, and that way you don't miss a single episode when we publish them almost every week on Mondays. God bless you guys until next week.
Well, we're done now. Thanks for listening. This is Jeff Roper reminding you that the mission of God is too grand for mediocrity or average living. You were created for a purpose, and that purpose is found in the mission of God. It's your life. Now go live it.